Hey guys, welcome back to Learn Python the Hard Way. In this video we are focusing on exercise 45 and will create our own game. And as always, you will find the link to the current exercise in the description below. This is part of the paid section of the book, so you would either need to purchase the book or alternatively feel free to follow along with this video. So in this exercise we're going to switch gears a little bit. And here we are actually going to create a program completely from scratch, and we're going to create our own game. So here are the requirements for the game that we are going to create. We should create a different game from the one that we made a couple of exercises ago. We should use more than one file and use import to use them. Then we should use one class per room that we are using in our game. We're going to create a text-based game and then give the classes names that fit their purpose. For example, gold room or koi pond room. So our runner will need to know about these rooms. So we should create a class that runs them and knows about them. Other than that, we are free to create the game in any way that we'd like. We should spend roughly around a week on that and really try to create the best game that we can create. We can use classes, functions, dictionaries, lists, anything that we learned about to make it really nice. And the purpose of this lesson, of this exercise, is really to teach us how to structure classes that need other classes inside of files. Alright, so we should take about a week to work on our game. And once we've implemented that game, we can evaluate the game. And there are a couple of different criteria we can take a look at to properly evaluate it. The first one is the function style. So here, this covers how our functions should look like. So first of all, when we are using functions inside of classes, we generally call them methods. So if you hear the expression methods, that basically is a function that is defined inside of a class. So when we work with functions and we want to name our functions, we typically would not name them based off what they actually do in detail, but instead we would basically name it after a command. So for example, we have that pop function or pop method that we saw before to actually remove an entry from a list. And this is actually called pop and not remove from end of list. Because even though that's what it does, that's not the specific command. So we should rather have a shorter, clear name referring to the command that's being executed. And in general, our functions should be kept small and simple and have it really concise. In terms of the classes that we are going to create, we should use camel case. For example, here, like starting with a capital letter and then capitalizing each word inside of our class name. We can of course use the init function, but we shouldn't do too much inside of it because that can make it more hard to use. All other functions or methods inside our class should use the underscore format. So for example, my underscore awesome underscore hair, and not written in any other way. We should be consistent in how we organize our function arguments. So for example, if we take the order dog, cat, user, we should be consistent whenever we define classes and not switch it around. We should try not to use variables that come from the modules or globals. They should be self-contained. In terms of the code style, of course, we should make sure to use plenty of spaces, not to cram our code in there. And if we can't read it out loud, then it's probably hard to read. We can also take a look at what other people are doing, looking at other code in Python until we find our own style. And of course, each programmer has their own kind of style, so we over time develop some taste of how to properly write code. And especially if we find some code that we really like, we can of course copy some of it or get basically some inspiration from that code. In terms of comments, While some people say you don't need any comments because the code should actually be so expressive as to be self-evident, we should still be using comment, basically not to explain of what the code does, but why the code does what it does. And when we write our comments for our functions, we would write the documentation for someone who will use our code. So that means we would write it in an objective way. We don't have to go into too much detail, but have clear structure and clear sentences. And of course, we should limit our comments. Comments can be really helpful, but as long as our code is written in a clear way, we don't have to basically explain every line of code. So we should rather describe the high-level points and focus mostly on why we took a certain approach, for example, not covering what each of the commands does in detail. And finally, of course, we should evaluate our game and really put ourselves into someone else's shoes and take a very stern, clear look on our code, take a look at all the mistakes we possibly made to fix them, to analyze it, to mark up our code. And the purpose of this exercise is to train our attention to details on classes. And once we've done that, we can find someone else's code and do the same thing, basically go through their code line by line and find out all the errors or style errors that we see. And the purpose of this exercise is really to start working on something from scratch ourselves, to build up our own game and to get some practice in structuring our code and also working through some more complex issues. So with that, just in terms of some structure, what we already saw before in exercise 43 is a high-level approach on how we can approach such a problem, how we can write a game on a high level or really any object-oriented code. And what we started out with was this 5-step approach to first of all write or draw about the problem, then to extract key concepts from the first step and research them, and then to create a class hierarchy and an object map for the concept, and then switching over to code the class and also to perform a test to run those classes that we wrote. And finally, we would basically repeat those steps and refine what we have written. So if we start with the first step, we can basically write out our basic game that we want to create. So for example, here we want to create a text-based adventure game. And we could, for example, say we have a situation where some orcs, for example, have stolen a soul stone from the elf realm, and our hero has basically to go out there and get back that item. And then we can have different rooms or a magical forest here that we have to navigate through to actually get the item back that we are searching. So that would be our problem statement here. From that, we can switch over to the next step and extract the key concepts from our problem description here. And what we did before is we identified the different nouns that we have in here. So for example, evil orcs, or for example, the hero, or the magical forest. And that can give us a sense of which kind of classes we may want to create going forward. So here we have a list of some of the key concepts: hero, evil orcs, soulstone, magic forest or room, map, scene, death. And then we can create our class hierarchy. What can also be helpful is if we take a look at our problem statement, to also take a look at the verbs, because that can give us a hint about some of the methods we may want to use. And with both of that, we can then create a class hierarchy. Here, for example, we have the map, our game engine, a scene, and then below the scene we have, for example, the death scene, our magical forest, an elf town, and light fountain. That would just be the different rooms or areas that we want to cover in our game. And looking at the different verbs, we can identify that on our map we probably want to have a next scene and an opening scene. And inside of our engine, we want to be able to play our game, of course, and to enter a scene. Now once we have that class hierarchy, we have a good structure about the different classes we likely want to use, and also the functions or methods associated with our classes. And we already see which kind of hierarchies we have. So we can, for example, see that the Death class here should probably be a subclass of the Scene, for instance. And the same, for example, for the Magical Forest here. After that, we can head over to the fourth step and then code our classes and basically perform a test to run them. And then after that, of course, we would basically repeat the entire process, refine it more, and then continue to write our code. So here, just as an example, we have a class called Scene, class Engine, class Death. Then we have the Magical Forest, which inherits from Scene. Death should, for example, also inherit from Scene. And this way we can really structure our code. And we can already fill in some of the methods that we specified. So for example, inside of the engine, we have our play method here to actually start our game. And at the moment you can see these are still some placeholders in here. We have the pass method entered in here, which basically says do nothing at the moment. But starting from this basic structure, this basic foundation, we can then iteratively write more and more code and specify our code in more detail. So if we take a look at a more complete version of the game, here for example we have the class Engine, our map class, and then at the bottom here some code to actually start our game. Here we have a list of the different scenes, and as specified in the exercise description, we should actually import some of the files that we are working with. So in this case here, I decided to create a separate Python file called scenes.py, and then inside of that file, if you just take a look at it, we have a number of different classes. So here we have the different scene classes, or the scene class, and the different subclasses, such as the Death class or the Magic Forest class. Now this is separated out, which means our main game file here is a little bit shorter, and we can then just decide to import those different scenes and subclasses of the scene class from that scenes file. And here in this case we are using a dictionary to basically associate the different classes that we defined in the scenes file with a certain key, and then we can simply refer to the key when we're actually using it. So if you want to run our program and just test it out, we can of course just type the command, and then in this case here we actually get the first print statement, so that we enter our Magical Forest here. There's an amazing light around us, and then what are we going to do about that? So we could walk, and then we can walk towards the light. And of course we can build on top of that, have different rooms, have different actions, and really write that out. So I would encourage you to actually write your own game, following the steps outlined here, fulfilling all those requirements. And as stated here in the book, spend maybe around a week on that topic and try to really research the different aspects, how to import, for example, files or code from a different code file, and how to really optimize the game file. Alright, so that's it for exercise 45, and see you guys in the next video with exercise 46.